I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Nick Antosca, the creator and showrunner of the Peacock True Crime Limited series, A Friend of the Family. Nick, I was so invested in this because I couldn't quite believe the sequence of events experienced by this family. And so, if I had that reaction, I'm just wondering what were your reactions to this story when you first came across the opportunity to adapt it for television?
Yeah, I mean, my first reaction is very similar to yours, and I think the reaction that most people have, which is how could this have happened? Another reaction that I had to hearing the story for the first time was because it had been sent to me as, maybe this is something to adapt. Is this is not a TV show. I don't see how this is a TV show. This is like too disturbing, too uncomfortable, too hard to comprehend. But I was incredibly fascinated by the story. So I read more about it. I read the book that Marianne Broberg, the mother, had written and self-published. And when I started to hear it in their voice a little bit more and experience the slow burn of the story, because it took place over 6 years. So when it's condensed into 90 minutes in a documentary, it's sort of so bam, 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 like shock after shock. When I started to experience it more the way that they experienced it, I realized it was a story about how people didn't see something. And because of that, there was a psychological and compelling story that hadn't really been told, even though people did know the outlines of the story. And how does any story start? Is with curiosity and I want to know more. I want to know how it could happen. So we reached out to Jan Broberg and the family because they're so present in the documentary, and we wanted to know if they would be open to having their story told and participating in it.
It's so fascinating because I mean, the moment that the show starts, we get Jan, talking to us about what happened in their lives. It puts you right into it puts you into their shoes straight away. And it then made me realize there's been some criticism leveled at so many other series in this genre, particularly around the ethics of amplifying, the deplorable people committing these crimes. This show, rightfully though, escapes that because the overriding priority is to focus on the victims and what happened to them from their perspective. I love that you so ardently want to focus on that, and I just wonder, was that something that you were really focused on and proud of throughout production, making sure that was the POV the whole time?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, it really is a case-by-case basis in telling a true story, whether you're going to do it with the participation of the people involved or not, because sometimes you need a certain objectivity. But in this case specifically, because Jan was so clearly a victim, she was a child when this happened to her, and because she is so active in telling her story, and also because they're so candid about the mistakes that they made, they're so open, and there's so much documentation of everything. I felt that it would be we would only be able to tell the story if it had their blessing and their participation. And it's a unique opportunity. I mean, I've told true crime stories before, produced other true crime stories. In some case, it's not always the right choice to do it this way, and there's not always the opportunity to do it this way. But it was a unique experience and very meaningful.
And I mean, as the saying goes, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. And I get the sense that you would agree with that. You've worked on true crime stories throughout your career, like The Act and Candy. What attracts you to bringing those kinds of stories to the screen? Because you've been so successful in the past, and now with this one, I mean, all I've heard is raves about the show. So what attracts you to it?
Well, I mean, as writers and as storytellers, what are we attracted to? We're attracted to telling like complicated, compelling human stories, and what better opportunity is there than telling a story that really happened to somebody? It seems too strange to be believed, but at its core, there are common human truths and vulnerabilities that you can get out of the story. I mean, The Act is a coming of age story, and so is this in a strange way. And there are themes deep in these stories that I think we can all relate to. And I don't tend to think of them automatically as true crime. I mean, we're not, going like, what is the next true crime story that we can tell? When I think about the stories that, are inspirations in terms of doing something like this right, it's stuff like Boys Don't Cry and Heavenly Creatures and Zodiac and things that are, true stories, but we don't really put them in kind of the true crime box necessarily. They're stories that, really happen to people, and they're complicated, and they're told with a kind of poetry and insight, you hope.
Does it ever occur to you, when you've got the family involved in the making of a show like this, where these themes are, they can be quite confronting, and was this extra sensitivity throughout production to ensure that the family weren't dealing with their PTSD too much, but you're also trying to get to some truth and also trying to show the audience this is actually what happened, and it was actually quite horrifying?
That was something that I was very anxious about going in, and was really top of mind, but it wasn't a problem. It wasn't an issue. And I think that the actors too were very kind of sensitive to this. And, are we going to be re-traumatizing Jan or her family? Are we going to be triggering them if we ask certain questions in the research? And it really was not the case. I mean, they have processed and confronted this over the years, and we had so much research material. We had thousands of pages of research material. We had court transcripts, we had the FBI records, we had the handwritten notes from the FBI agent the first time he came to talk to them. We have Jan's diaries, like all scanned, her sister's diaries. There was just so much. And sometimes, once in a while, there would be something like, Jan or her sisters would say, like, well, I don't think that it would have been said this way, or I don't think that it would have been said that way. And for the most part, we would adjust to that. And we were very, very grateful to have that. And once in a while, they would say something like, I don't think, Dad would have had this conversation or something like that. And it would say, we took that, almost word for word from the court transcripts where he said that's what happened. And they would say, oh, okay. So it really was a kind of constant conversation. We sent them all the scripts. We would invite Jan into the writer's room and ask her questions. So, that fear subsided over time. And the actors will talk about this too. I know that Jake came into it feeling like, I'm playing the person who kidnapped and assaulted and brainwashed this woman as a child. Like, is it going to be weird to interact with her? Maybe I'll kind of keep my distance. I don't want to traumatize her. And she wrote him a letter, which he talks about a lot, basically giving him permission, saying, you don't have to worry about me while you're doing this performance. Like, I'm okay. I have a good life and I'm past this. So, don't be afraid to immerse yourself in this. And I think that permission was really meaningful, certainly to the cast. It was to me and the writers. And Jan also talked to the production designer, to the art department, everything. We really tried to get it right.
Yeah, I mean, it really shines through. And Jake Lacey is phenomenal in this. He's so hypnotic as this insidious predator, and he's not the supervillain. He's not over the top. There's this manipulative way that his character B, it just keeps adjusting and adapting to his circumstances. When you were watching Jake do this performance on set, what were your thoughts? What were your reactions to him?
Well, my first reaction early on was, what else can I write for Jake Lacy to do? Because, I mean, I knew he was a terrific actor. I'd followed his career for a while. And, I thought, obviously, coming into it with, he's known as like the nice guy, and there's articles about like, the nicest guys Jake Lacy has played and everything. And he kind of turned that on its head a little bit in White Lotus, and then really turned it on its head here. And I never doubted that he could do it. I mean, we asked him to do it, but just from the first couple days, I was like, oh my God, he's terrifying. And he understands exactly, just from the initial conversations that he and Jan had and that we had, and he listened to tapes of Berchtold talking, because there's a lot of recordings, FBI recordings and journals that he made himself. And he just synthesized it in this really brilliant way where he could use, he knows his tools, and like the smile can be armor, and he just synthesized it perfectly so that you're so like uncomfortable watching this character. I felt.
Yeah, amazing. Nick, thank you so much for your time today. It's fascinating. We'll bring you back shortly for our group chat. I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Chris Brancato, co-creator and showrunner for the epic crime drama series Godfather of Harlem, which will premiere its third season this January. So, Chris, season 2 ended with these Harlem riots. Where is the show headed for season 3? Because I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, first of all, the show will be premiering on MGM Plus, which
Right.
is what Epix is changing to, on January 15th, 2023. So we ended the last season. Last season was about Bumpy trying to seize control of the French Connection from the Italians, making him a wholesaler at their level. And he managed to effectuate that collection of the dope, 3,000 kilos. But the Harlem riots started as a result of the death of a black kid at the hands of a policeman. And by dumb luck, the 3,000 kilos of dope burnt up in a warehouse while Bumpy was otherwise occupied with trying to save Malcolm from some hitmen who were associated with the Nation of Islam. So we begin season 3 days later with Bumpy deep in the hole. He owes the Italians money. He knows that things are going to be rough. Chin is in jail for an indeterminate length of time because his own daughter ratted him out in the last episode of last year. So a new Italian figure emerges, Joe Colombo, a guy who is going to mind Harlem for Chin and also try to cut a deal with Bumpy Johnson to help distribute the heroin. But Bumpy feels caged when he's working with the Italians. It hasn't worked out with him. He was partnered with Chin in season 2, and it just didn't work out. So he refuses Colombo's even generous deal, setting the stage for a season of conflict between Joe Colombo, a new boss, and Bumpy Johnson. And Bumpy realizes he needs an alliance, and he ends up partnering with a Spanish Harlem gangster named Jose Battle, real life character, who was involved in the numbers business, women, prostitution, etc. And he ends up allying with Bumpy, a black-brown alliance, because Jose Battle is Latin, Cuban. And he wants nothing more than to displace Castro from Cuba and retake Cuba. And so Bumpy associates with Battle, which puts him ultimately in the orbit of the CIA, with whom Battle is working to try to take down Castro. So what we have this season is the Cuban connection.
Yeah.
As all these worlds collide, a new Italian bad guy, Jose Battle representing Spanish Harlem, and Bumpy in Central Harlem trying to maintain a grip after losing the French Connection.
It's so exciting. I love it how you're injecting this new Cuban element from Spanish Harlem. And I must admit, Chris, my favorite, I mean, apart from Forrest, which we will talk about him in a minute, the Italian stuff is what really gets me going. As someone from Italian background who's obsessed with gangster films, I just love it. And I was hoping that Joe Colombo would make an appearance in the show. So there's so much to look forward to, right? But then it also makes me realize the show can be so successful because of the parallels that we inevitably draw between the civil rights movement, 1960s, and the current conversations that we are having in this political and social climate that we're living in. Does that really occur to you very much when you're writing and creating the show, that people are going to draw those parallels to the current day?
Always. And when I was approached with the idea of doing Bumpy Johnson in the 1960s, he had a very long criminal career. I had written a movie about Bumpy Johnson in the 1930s, played by Lawrence Fishburne. So I wasn't that interested in doing Bumpy Johnson fighting the Italians again. I felt like I had already done it, until I recalled that Bumpy Johnson and Malcolm X were friends. And I realized there could be a gangster show that was the collision of organized crime and civil rights. And that turns out to be a Rubik's Cube that's incredibly difficult to solve on an episode-to-episode basis, trying to combine two things that actually don't belong in the same sentence. That said, it was immediately apparent to us that by using the prism of the past, we could talk about things of contemporary relevance and create a kind of safe distance, so that almost every episode dwells on stuff that has contemporary resonance, but is kind of safe to watch because it's set way back when. Yeah. And what we also can see from the show is, on the one hand, things have changed greatly for African Americans. We've had an African American president. And on the other hand, things haven't changed much at all. And so that's what the show is trying to articulate. And in particular, Forrest Whitaker playing Bumpy Johnson is a key to the whole show. Yeah. He's a brilliant actor. He's number one on the call sheet. He's a great force for good. Our set is a happy place. And I like to call the show the education of Bumpy Johnson. He's being slowly but surely affected by Malcolm. He understands that he's importing dope into his own community, and he justifies it by saying, well, somebody's going to do it. It'll be the white guys, the Italians. So I'm going to do it myself and help the community with the money. So It's a conundrum that Bumpy faces over the course of many seasons. And will he change? What's the effect of Malcolm and other factors, like the fact that he has a daughter who was a heroin addict?
Yeah, that's right. I can't imagine the show actually without Forrest Whitaker. He's such a towering presence on this show. His performance, to me, and he's won every award under the sun for previous work, but this is some of the best stuff that he's ever done in his career. I've told him that to his face. He acknowledged that. So yeah, he brings so much to the show. I totally agree with you. There's something I want to talk to you about as well with this show that I talk about often with people who have worked on Godfather of Harlem and other shows about organized crime. And that is that I feel like it's aspirational fantasy for many of us, because we love seeing gangsters do really bad things and get away with it, because sometimes we feel like the real world and the criminal justice system, for example, doesn't quite get us there. What do you feel about gangster films and why we love them so much?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's fun to watch people do things that we wouldn't do ourselves. Yeah. And my writing in that genre, I have several shows in the crime genre, really comes from just being interested in watching them myself. I gravitate toward them. That said, you really need to have a fresh angle on it. Yeah. There's so many tropes. It's so easy with the Italians in particular to fall into just tropey stuff you've seen before. So we fight really hard to make sure. I mean, I can't tell you the discussions in the room of like, oh, how do we kill somebody this week in a way we didn't kill somebody last week? What's the fresh kill? So, it's the bigger challenge is to try to thematically link the stories together so that the civil rights aspect that Malcolm, the stories he carries, end up dovetailing with the crime story in one fashion or another, either as a juxtaposition or to support what it is that Bumpy's doing to try to get himself out of a jam. And in this season, Malcolm takes a trip to Mecca in episode 3 and Africa in episode 4, this transformative journey that is his pathway to changing his political philosophy, becoming more inclusive of other civil rights groups, and also earning the hatred of the FBI and the NYPD and the CIA to the point where his life is in severe danger.
Yeah. I wonder, actually, when you tell your production team, we're headed off to Saudi Arabia and Africa in terms of location and scene and the scenes, what's the reaction that you get? Do they are they terribly excited, or are they daunted, and are they like, are you kidding me? Like, what happens?
The reaction is, what's the blueprint for the fake Saudi Arabian room we're going to create on our stages in East New York and Brooklyn? And then what stock shots of Saudi Arabia are we going to get to put in front of the room that we're building in East New York? We don't leave home very much. So even the Africa portion and the Saudi portion are shot on built sets in New York.
Yeah. I think it would be such an amazing challenge to sink your teeth into. Chris, congrats on a great show. It's the flagship for the upcoming MGM Plus, used to be Epix. Such a success, and you must be super proud. We're going to bring you back shortly for our group chat.
Thank you. And the final thing to say about Farr's performance is he's playing a lead here. He's not playing the priest in Black Panther. He's dominating the show.
Yeah.
He's getting to show so many colors of his acting ability. He did a master class in acting the other day in a scene with Malcolm. And so I can't more strongly recommend his performance and how he handles being the solid lead of a show. And he's marvelous to work with and watch.
Totally agree. He's amazing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. All right, take a little break and we'll be back soon. I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Andrew Hinderaker, creator and showrunner for Showtime's horror drama Let the Right One In. Andrew, I had the luxury of not having seen the original Swedish film or the American remake, nor have I read the novel. So I was all in. I'm so invested in this story. I have no idea where it's going, the mythology behind the existence of vampires in contemporary America. Talk me through, though, the balancing of adhering to the source material and the opportunity to bring something new and unique from your perspective to this story.
Absolutely. Well, I first and foremost recommend highly all three. Gorgeous novel, gorgeous and terrifying novel that was just rendered beautifully in both the Swedish and the American film. Matt Reeves, who directed the American remake, was a mentor of mine that I was lucky enough to work with and for on a show called The Way, and so all three are exquisite works of art and create an enormously high bar. The sort of privilege of having two beautiful films come before you is there's also a certain freedom in not trying to recreate what's already been done. And for me, in approaching this beautiful novel, I saw an opportunity to honor all that really spoke to me and that I thought was quintessential about the work, while also telling a story entirely our own. So in our series, the characters, the setting, and even the stories are entirely new. But the series comes from and is a result of reading the novel dozens of times, seeing the film I don't know how many times, and loving the source material so fiercely and letting it inform really every aspect of our show, how it feels, the sensibility of the show, and above all, the emotional core of the show. The both the novel and the films really are special in the canon of horror and vampire works, because they tilt the frame to the sort of Renfield character, the helper of the vampire. And in the case of the novel and the film, this character Oscar, who's friends with the child vampire, and in our series, with the vampire's actual father, who's tasked with bringing her blood and taking care of her and keeping her alive and keeping hope alive that this will not be her existence forever.
Yeah, I love it. I love the whole concept. And I'm just dying to see where you're taking this to the finale, which we will see very soon. You know, the horror genre I would say has seen quite a resurgence over the last few years in film and television. And I feel like it's currently really hit the zeitgeist, which I haven't seen for a while. What do you most value or appreciate about working in this particular genre?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, my very first job in television was getting to write for a really beautiful series called Penny Dreadful that John Logan created and that I just loved. And John would often talk about with that series, Victorian England, because his source material was Dracula and Frankenstein. And that was those works of art were being written at a time where the world was changing rapidly, where they were entering an industrial age, and it felt like the future was incredibly uncertain. And I think that, we're in a pretty precarious moment right now where the future feels uncertain. And there's a lot of work out there right now that's deeply nostalgic because it can be very comforting to kind of escape into what feels familiar and what feels safe. And one of the things that I love about working in the horror genre is it invites you to traffic in what it actually feels like right now, which is, as I say, precarious, sometimes scary. But there's an opportunity in the horror genre to honor how it feels and then to, imagine journeys that could have, hopeful endings.
Yeah, there's a couple of kids in the show by necessity, as per the story. Madison Bayes in particular, I am astonished. I just don't know how I've seen kids work on set before. I know how hard it can be, particularly with labor laws. How on earth were you able to get that kind of performance out of someone like her? It's so mature and it's so heartbreaking. She's wonderful in this show, isn't she?
She's astonishing, yeah. And first and foremost, how we're able to shoot this show and shoot Madison scenes and Ian Foreman, who plays Isaiah's scenes, is a tribute to them. It's a tribute to our whole cast and crew, but it's a tribute to those two little humans who are just absolutely remarkable, so talented, and such wonderful little human beings. And I think that what's particularly challenging is those roles are not reduced. The role that Madison plays is arguably the most challenging and most complex role of an entire cast of challenging and complex roles. Yeah. And her scene partners are Oscar nominee Demian Bashir and Tony winner Anika Noni Rose. And she's holding her own. And it's astonishing at 12 years old. But it is a challenge because, we shoot a show largely on location, a lot of nights, a lot of exterior, a lot of winter, and we start in winter, but then we shoot into the spring and summer. So there were scenes, for example, the episode that just aired was at Coney Island, and we had 2 nights at Coney Island. We have to wait until nightfall because our character is a vampire. She cannot survive daylight. Right. So we can't shoot a moment of usable footage while the sun is out. And it became dark at 8:40 p.m. and we lose her at 10 p.m. And we lose Isaiah. We lose the 2 leads of the show. We have an hour and 20 minutes. And we had 2 nights and we got something like 20 minutes of our episode with the 2 of them at Coney Island. And so it's a tribute to our fabulous director of that episode, Viet Nguyen, our cinematographer, Eric Branco, our whole crew, our leads, Demian and Nika, who were amazing and such supportive individuals and who are so gracious to understand that we're all at the mercy of these these children, but above all to Madison and Ian, because it's sort of impossible to accomplish that, and then to pull it off is entirely a tribute to them. And then they're so good, it's really their relationship is so central to the series, and like you say, is really the heart of the source material, and it's imperative to honor that.
That's right.
And so I just can't say enough about Madison and Ian both.
They're wonderful. And of course, like, as you say, Oscar nominee Demian Bashir, Tony winner, and Nicanoni Rose. I expected them to be amazing, and they absolutely are. But this show lives or dies, I say, on the performances of these kids. And thank goodness they are as good as they are. It's just no pressure at all for you as showrunner to make sure that it's all happening. But the final question is this. This is what I love most about this show, honestly, and that's its immersive and ambitious visuals. Are so cinematic. And also Josue's Greco and Dan Roma's score. I mean, I actually listened to that on my phone. I think it's fantastic. From the outset, during pre-production, though, what are the stylistic choices that inspired and guided what the look and feel of the show ultimately became over season one?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate you mentioning Dan and Josue. The work that they did as the composers of the show is just stunning, and it's cinematic. And we have our episode that's about to air this weekend. It's episode 7. It's our most ambitious episode. It's a backstory episode that's set 10 years in the past and explains what happened to this family. And most of our episodes have between 40 and 50 strips or scenes. This one has over 80. And I mention it because it's not only our most ambitious episode, but Dan and Josue, the score that they did for it is it's astonishing. And in terms of the visual look of the show, a huge amount of the credit goes to Seith Mann, who is an executive producer on the series, who directed the pilot and directed episodes 2 and 3. Seith came aboard very early on, and he and I had a really collaborative relationship, and we would speak for hours on end for months before we even entered pre-production for the series. And I think Seith was really interested in doing 2 things. One was to honor some of the aesthetics of the original, by which there would be a value placed on stillness, a value placed on composition. But then also Seith is he's a contemporary New Yorker. He went to school at NYU. He wanted to, just as that film was quintessential to the suburbs of Stockholm, he wanted to create something that looked and felt like New York, and the New York that he knew. So it was sort of taking one foot and allowing it to be informed by the aesthetic of the original film, but then the other foot allowing it to feel sort of contemporary and vibrant. And the final piece that he said, which is really what sold me on Seith, is, he said that there is the thing that he responded to in the scripts was that it was, yes, there was a lot of darkness in the show, but there was an extraordinary amount of love. And that because the core of the show is, what are you willing to do for someone you love? That's what spoke to him as a father. It's what spoke to him as an artist. And so he kind of developed the aesthetic of, he would always think about the sort of light and the darkness. And that, I know, sounds like an image that has been used before, but the way it really profoundly, literally informed so many of the visuals. For example, one of the first scene of the show is a vampire experiencing his first sunrise in years. Amazing. And he has a shot where, in the sort of darkness of the eyes, you see the reflection of the sun breaking the horizon. And that's like a literal light in the darkness. And that's how a lot of his shots are composed, that it speaks to, there's a lot of darkness in the frame, but there is a tiny flickering light that never goes out.
Oh, I love that. Like the subway tunnels, when that use of the torch just blew my mind. Anyway, we're running out of time. I could literally sit here for hours. I won't do it. We're going to bring you back shortly for a group chat. Thank you, Andrew. I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby here, and I'm just completely delighted to be with three of the best TV showrunners on the planet for three amazing series that I love, and I know that you all love too. I'm joined by Nick Antosca, Chris Brancato, and Andrew Hinderaker. They're here to talk about, respectively, A Friend of the Family, limited series on Peacock, Godfather of Harlem, which is about to premiere season 3 on MGM Plus, and Let the Right One In, which is still airing its first season on Showtime. Gentlemen, welcome to our panel. My first question is really about how we often talk about how television has become, over the last few years, last 15, maybe 10 years, this peak TV concept. But what do you think about the challenge of not only bringing a particular vision to life, blood, sweat, and tears, but then to stand out in this crowded, chaotic marketplace of content and distractions? So in other words, is the worst fate for any series to simply be met with indifference and be ignored? Would you prefer to be disliked in those moments? I'm going to go to you first, Andrew, because your show is currently airing its first season. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm so excited to hear what Nick and Chris have to say, because they've been doing this a bit longer and have been really successful in creating series that I love and that have certainly stood out for me. So I'm going to learn from them. I think it is the challenge right now because there's so much content out there. There's so much material that's out there. We, with our series, we simply try to lean into what is most specific and what is most personal. And I think that for Let the Right One In is that idea that one of the scariest things on TV could also be one of the most moving, that that we're trying to write something that defies categorization from horror or drama, and that you can try to prove that premise by having a horror show that stars Demian Bashir and Anika Noni Rose. But it's a challenge. So I'm incredibly excited to hear what these guys say and to learn from them.
Right, gentlemen, who would like to go first? Tell me. Go for it.
I think the worst fate for a good show is to not be made. So if you get to make your show, it would suck if it was met with complete indifference. But if it's a meaningful experience making it, you made something good that you're proud of, then fair enough. I mean, it is a double-edged sword, but the age of peak TV means that a lot of people get to make shows, and a lot of shows get made that wouldn't otherwise, and voices get to be heard. I looking at my own career, almost every show that I've made is like a real long shot. It's like you think sort of like, oh man, somebody's going to get fired for greenlighting this, so let's just make it quick before they stop us. And I came up, right before I had my first show, Channel Zero, I was on Hannibal with Brian Fuller, which Chris Brancato knows well. I learned a lot. Yeah, but just putting a strange art project on TV, or putting something very challenging or weird on TV by sheer force of will and sometimes trickery. And there are more opportunities to do that in the last 10 years than there were for the 40 or 50 years before that. And that's a good thing.
Definitely. What about you, Chris? What do you think?
Well, first of all, streaming changed everything, which is to say that we were allowed to do things, for instance, on Narcos, that would be unfathomable in the television world I had worked in before. We shot it all in Colombia. We were allowed to have the Narcos speak in full Spanish with tons of subtitles. It was a level of creative freedom that then opened up the door for me to work on shows, and only shows that I cared about. that I had a vested interest in, that I had a vision for. I found that when I was work for hire on someone else's created show, sure, I could do it. And Brian Fuller is a genius and created this, piece of outsider art that should never have existed on NBC. It should have been on FX or something. But regardless, I find at this point in my career that the joy, there's a little sense of like, oh, you're just making shows now that get put up on a library shelf on whatever particular streamer. So it's a little less special. That said, for me, at my a ripe old age, the joy is in the doing. So if I love the show I'm working on and my day is filled with creation that has to do with the show I care about, then frankly, whether it does well or not is less important to me. Do I want it to do well? Yes. And the way I think you do that in today's crowded world of like, it's weird. There are tons of shows on the air, and yet it's incredibly difficult to sell a show. I don't even know what the point is. But the fact is, I've had a little success trying to mosh two things together that don't belong in the same sentence: organized crime and civil rights. And that then creates a situation where the executives are hearing something that has familiarity on both sides, but also because you're moshing them together, like, is entirely new.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to give that a lot of thought as you enter the sales marketplace. Like, what am I saying that gets them? Why here? Why now? Why is the show important to do right now? What's the contemporary relevance? Because if it could have been done 5 years ago or 5 years from now, then you shouldn't do it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And by the way, Hannibal, I'm still not over that. That made such an impact on me as a viewer and as someone who appreciates art. Beautiful show. And that brings me to this. There are shows that we carry with us in our DNA. TV does that more than I think any other art form. We're passionate about good TV, aren't we? And I'd just love to know, what are you passionate about from either your upbringing when you first, started working in this industry, or even recently? What shows mean a lot to you as artists and creators?
I'll say one that really stuck with me from the last few years, which I don't hear people talk about, was this Israeli show, Losing Alice. It was on Apple TV, I think, but it was an acquisition. It is one of the most creepy, strange, sexy, weird shows that I've ever seen. I think it was all directed and written by one person. I could be wrong about that. I don't want to misspeak, but it is so delicious and so surprising and just, unique that it stayed with me in the couple of years since I've seen it. I watched it and I thought, like, I wish that I had made this, which I don't think about too many things. So Losing Alice for me.
Nice. I'm just looking it up. Yep, I will certainly check that one out.
I want to say, not to be bragging, but in Hannibal, I'm the one who came up with the human totem pole.
Brilliant. God, man.
I have a framed picture of it somewhere hidden in my attic. For me, shows like Breaking Bad, Sopranos, the standard shows that involve crime interest me. I also love true crime, and I sort of lull myself to sleep every night by watching the 300th episode of the Forensic Files. I've seen them all like 10 times. And it's a 22-minute little murder that gets solved, and that for some crazy reason drifts me off into a pleasant sleep. So I'm strange that way. The funny thing is I don't like to watch TV that much. I don't have time. I spend all day watching TV, looking at cuts, et cetera, et cetera. So to some degree, what I watch is point specific. So the show I'm working on right now, which is called Hotel Cocaine, is a Latin Breaking Bad. So I'm going back and rewatching Breaking Bad. So a lot of it's work related, and seeing the moves that a Vince Gilligan makes, or Chris Mundy on Ozark.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Andrew, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. I think that in a lot of the shows, even the shows I admire, you tend to see you recognize the patterns and the moves, and okay, I'm seeing the act one into act two, act three, and so those shows where I'm just sort of blown away by what they're doing structurally. These shows like The Wire, or even right now Succession, where I feel like it's just on a different level and it's really playing with form in a way that I find so surprising and just so exciting and ambitious. And then I think I mentioned I got to write for the show called Penny Dreadful. That was for me so formative because that was my first gig, but also working for John Logan, who like myself started in like the little storefront theaters of Chicago to kind of and my first day on set told me we're making a play. We just have a lot nicer budget. You know, that philosophy could be applied to the television world, even when you're making something ambitious and cinematic was for me super formative.
So exciting. Guys, thank you so much for your time today. I just friend of the family, everyone check it out, and we look forward to your next project, Nick. Chris, your show's coming out in January, Godfather of Harlem. Can't wait for that. And Andrew, let the right one in. We're about to see the finale in a couple of weeks, and I'm just desperate for season 2, so hurry up, Showtime. Everybody, thank you again, and good luck this award season.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.